The Hunger Games belongs to a genre that's popular in young adult lit right now, literature, and it's not just young adults, but it's kids aren't reading Hardy Boys and Little House on the Prairie anymore. That's what I hear. But the Hunger Games, whatever you think about whether those are good stories, if it's something a Christian ought to watch or whatever, that's another discussion. And there's interesting points on both sides, but that's not where I'm interested in going tonight. What I'm interested in, well, first of all, how many here have either seen or read any of the books or movies, or the movie? Okay. How many here have someone in their family or at work that has seen or read?
Do they have to still be living with us?
They don't have to. What I'm getting at here, whether you've seen or read it, isn't really the issue. The issue is, it's part of culture. This is part of the conversation that's happening in culture right now. It's happening at the water cooler, it's happening at home. If your kids are going to read it, or family has, or it's out there. There are people in your churches and neighborhoods that are familiar with this, and the issues that are raised in the Hunger Games, and this, what I'm saying now, isn't specific to the Hunger Games. This is with any movie or popular book. It becomes part of the conversation. And we can either enter that conversation or run and hide. I don't think running and hiding is terribly effective. So regardless what we think about the particular movie or book that we're discussing, I don't think it's effective to either side with and say, fantastic, we're right behind this, or no, we don't believe people should see this. I think what's more effective from an apologetic standpoint is to look at this and say, okay, this is something that's out there. This is part of the conversation that's being had in culture right now. What are we going to do with that? Do we have anything to say to that? So, we're going to talk. This is going to be my attempt at moderating a panel. So we'll see how this goes. And you're the panel.
Wild.
First, some definitions here to words that you don't use every day. Dystopia. We were going through this at lunch trying to figure out the right way to say this. See if I get this right, and feel free to change this. The best I've come up with for a way to define this is a warning about the likely negative outcomes of attempted utopia based on a false worldview. So utopia is the best possible world where everything's wonderful. But when somebody is attempting to achieve utopia, to try and make things as good as they possibly can be, but they're basing it on false premises, a false worldview, false way of life, morality that doesn't work, those kind of things. There's a warning that if we were to go down this road, it won't work out well. And that sort of a story is referred to as a genre called dystopia. Am I close? Okay. All right. We got agreement on that one. Then worldview, just for anyone that's a new term too, just think of worldview as the way you see the world. People sometimes talk in terms of a set of glasses you wear. What presuppositions you have that makes the world make sense to you. Worldviews answer questions like, how did we get here? What went wrong? What's the solution? And different people from different worldviews, Christian worldview, other religions, they all have different answers to those questions. And those presuppositions that they've got loaded into themselves about the answers to these questions is what's going to determine how they see other things and how they react to it. So the Christian worldview says God created us, we rebelled, and restoration is found in Jesus, in a nutshell. That's the short version. And then one last word, a meta-narrative. A narrative is a story. We're telling a story. When you put meta in front of something, it's talking about something about the word you're modifying. So meta-narrative is information about a narrative. So it's a story behind a story. So we have this story. What's the story behind the story? There's a bigger picture. You might tell a little story about something that happened to you one weekend on a vacation you went. A bigger story about it would be the life you grew up in, the home you grew up in. A bigger story is the country and the culture and the dynamic that's happening. You keep going to a bigger and bigger story. There is some ultimate big story, and that's what I'm talking about with a meta-narrative. Is something that is ultimate reality, and we'll get more of that later. So now the glamorous panel you have before you.
That's true for some of us.
And you got nothing to fiddle with now. So Anthony Weber, first on my left, is a teacher at Traverse Christian. One of his classes is Understanding the Times, that's called. correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, it's concerned with identifying and evaluating worldviews, as I understand it. So he's teaching kids how to see worldviews and what to do with them, how to identify them. So when we're talking about a story that is out there today, I think it's helpful to have the perspective of someone who's familiar in talking in terms of worldviews. Carl Mazeros, if you want me to know any detail about a movie, no matter how obscure, Carl is your man. If you want to know how a movie was made, who made it, why they made it, what they were thinking when they made it, who is friends with them, absolutely.
And he had no date at prom.
But you're just what we need.
This is it, it's the highlight. That's all I got.
Tonight was made for you. Emily Slater is What We Are Not. Female, hip, young. She's also an avid reader and can help us to identify trends in literature today, especially that's marketed to the young adult college age, I'm thinking. You've read Hunger Games, right?
Maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
Or 3 times, whatever. Probably 3 times.
Yeah. So, as parents, most of us are unaware of what's popular today, especially in teen literature. And I'm not terribly interested in it. I'll read it if I have to. I have other things I like to read. I don't have that much time. Emily is aware of what's going on in those circles, so that's why I had her sit in on this as well. So, if you're a note taker that is interested in this, under the, I think I called it evaluation, I got 3 blanks. And the framework we're going to use for this portion is to talk about a framework for evaluating entertainment. And I'm just going to lay out what these points are and then throw it to you guys for whatever thoughts you have. The first of the 3 is good. It is the word to use to hold that place there. What I mean by good, for evaluating is entertainment good, and specifically this question, or I'm sorry, this movie, this book, is The Hunger Games good? What I mean is, was the book well written? Was the movie well made, high quality, good acting? Did it look like low budget, or did it have a solid script, acting, special effects, that kind of thing? So, from book and or movie, would you say that The Hunger Games is good? Whoever would like to chime in.
My only problem with The Hunger Games was the fire effect. The movie was awful. We're just saying that. Let's just put that is, otherwise, I mean, we talked about it. It's pretty bad. It looks like an 80s fire. I mean, okay, I was only 2 years in the 80s. I'm assuming it's what an 80s fire looked like. Maybe you guys could give me some more input on that. But otherwise, the movie, to me, I thought was good. I liked it. I thought that it was very well acted. I thought the people that they chose were great. I didn't have any problem with that. I mean, my only problem that took me away from it really was the fire scenes.
No, I'll talk on the book just a little bit. I was nervous going into the book because I assumed it was the next Twilight, and I just couldn't handle that. But and the things that I've read in the young adult literature, I just finished the first Harry Potter book, which was sort of painful actually. I thought it was very well written. I thought it had a very high standard of words and there's a word here I'm looking for.
I'm working on it.
The words were of a high level, a high reading level. My son's going through it right now. He reads it to me and he struggles, and we have to go through some things on what word means which.
Vocabulary?
Vocabulary! Thank you! You see it? A whole tray of taking of yours.
Are you going for register?
No, vocabulary.
Bigger
Yes.
words?
So, I thought it was very well written. I have a big thing for adverbs. I hate adverbs. It just drives me nuts when I come to a bunch of adverbs. And it was read very smoothly, very few adverbs. I thought it was just a high quality book.
I enjoyed the movie. I thought the book was better than the movie, kind of for the same reason that there was a lot of layers to the book. In terms of Suzanne Collins, I think was the author's name, in terms of her ability to create believable characters and characters that you resonate with, she did an excellent job. I'm not a teenage girl. Never was, in fact. But you very quickly enter into her world. Even the characters, the peripheral characters who she interacts with, Even though they don't get the same like internal disclosure that she does, it wasn't hard at all to put yourself in their place and kind of imagine what the difficulty must be in the different things that they're going through. In particular, I thought she did a great job. How many of you have seen it or read it again, by the way? There will be spoilers. The scene in the movie and the book where she is in the Hunger Games and PETA is hurt and they need to get medicine. And the way she gets medicine is to pretend she's in love with him. And so she has to kiss him, she has to show affection like she genuinely cares. And you spend most of that section not actually knowing is she legit or not. And it reveals more about her than PETA. And as a guy who in high school dated girls who you have no idea what they're thinking of you, but you really like them, and sometimes they're nice and sometimes they're not. It was a portion of the story you could really enter into and go, that poor guy. He likes her and he has no clue that he's just getting his chain jerked on this one. If he is, and you're never quite sure, and I thought that was the tension of what she has to do to save him. Is it real or is it not? I don't know. I thought he was written really well. I think she's a good writer.
What if you could just, there are people here who haven't read it or know it is, just like a 30-second
I
summary
was
of
just
what,
thinking
okay.
that. Who wants to do that?
Maybe a master on the subject.
I can. I mean, the Hunger Games takes place in the futuristic dystopian society where there's 12 districts called Pan Am, correct? And there's the 12 districts, and then there's the capital, which is the government, and the high society people living in it. As penance for a previous rebellion, each year each district has to send 2 tributes, a boy and a girl between the ages of 12 and 17, to basically fight to the death on TV. There's one winner, and that's it. Like, each kid can put their name in more times, depending if they get more food from the government. Katniss is the main character. She offers herself up as a sacrifice for her sister, who's 12 and she gets chosen. Which makes me emotional, sorry. It makes me very emotional and girly. But, so she, spoiler obviously, wins the first Hunger Games. There's a trilogy, so the first one is Hunger Games, second one is Catching Fire, and then Breaking Free. Mockingjay. Yes. Obviously, I've read this. So her winning it in the end, she wins with PETA, who is the other tribute from her district. She comes from District 12. The government sees it as sort of a mockery of them because there's not supposed to be 2 winners, and they both wind up winning, which kind of sets off a revolution in the next one, and it all ends with in the third big uprising with all the districts. Is that pretty good?
Yeah.
If I can add one more thing, this is a trilogy. I expected the second book to be worse because typically the second book of something, they have to ramp up whatever was there in the first one and it just gets worse, like more sensational. Not the case, and same with the third one. I thought each book got better. They each got darker, but each got better
What is
in
the
terms of literature.
What is the purpose of the Hunger Game? Like, why do they do that? Why do they make them
It's
fight
to
for
make
that?
them, it's the government's way of saying we own you, don't do this again, don't try to rebel again. So they take 2 of their kids from each district as to say.
They're reminding all the districts they're in control.
Yes,
Yeah, the
don't,
thinking is if you're powerless to stop us from taking your children and telling them for entertainment, that you're going to be powerless to do
right.
anything
I mean,
else.
the government
Right,
shows it
that's
as a way of like, they're telling you, congratulations, you're the tribute, it's so exciting, you know, but obviously it's just a way to keep them under their thumb and not to keep them from uprising again.
It's a good way for the government to prove that they're not bluffing.
Right.
So it's like televised or
It's
like a
televised,
reality show?
yes. And so the people in the Capitol people in the Capitol don't have to send their kids. So to them, it's just a sport. It's very, when you watch the movie, it's disheartening in the book, but when you watch the movie, that's when it really hit. Because it was a big game to them. They're all very excited. There's bets being placed. It was
Like Super Bowl parties,
it's,
kind
yes,
of vibe.
it's very disturbing
Yeah.
to see.
Very similar to like, putting Christians in the Colosseum against lions, that sort of thing.
Except it's kids killing each other,
Yeah.
so it's pretty
And sure, none of us is in favor of killing kids. And that obviously is one of the things that people they react strongly to. That was my first reaction when I first heard of the series. This is about kids killing each other. Fantastic. This is I don't think this is something that I want my kid to read. I'm not interested in reading it. And that may be where you're still at. And I don't think it's bad necessarily. I think it's different strokes. But this is what it is. This is what the book is what the movie is. So we're driving it. What are we going to do with it? Second question. So good was the first one. Was it good? Second one, was the Hunger Games true? The story that's presented, given the scenario they present, and sure, just like in any, you're talking about, sci-fi or a number of things. Was the story? Could you say that Star Wars is true? Well, you talk about, there's something called a suspension of disbelief, where you have to enter into a story in order for it to work. And if you have to suspend your thinking for the entire movie, that's not a good movie. Those don't last very long for me. But if I can suspend disbelief and say, okay, given the fact that that we were in the future and everybody lived in space, could this conceivably follow? Okay, sure, maybe we find other races and whatever. I can buy that if it's entertainment. Not that I believe it, but for the sake of the story, I can suspend disbelief there. I know.
Breaking some hearts over here.
I know. There goes Carl's Hall background. Sorry, it's all a story.
Can I say it a different way?
Yes.
True means not is it true as in the people or characters or situations exist in the real world, but true as in do the relational dynamics, the cause and effect, the sowing and reaping, are those things true? The deeper questions, the meta-narratives go back to your question. Does it tell us true things about the world? Jesus told parables that weren't true in the sense that they didn't actually have to happen in linear time, but they were true in that they told something important about the world.
Right. Yeah, I would word it, another way to word it, in that if given the scenario presented, are realistic consequences portrayed? That's one way to look at it. Another is, if we did, assume we can enter into this where we're in a post-rebellion world and a capital really existed and ruled all of us districts, are the dynamics presented in the Hunger Games plausible? Or is the whole thing just really tough to believe? So, would you say it's true? Does it correspond to what would be seen as true?
I would say within the genre, it's true. I think, in a way, if you read The Hunger Games, it is written for teens. And so because of that, I think they actually ratchet down the violence in that. I mean, I think they do a good job of painting a world without God for teens. But if you look at governments in history that have been without God, if you look at Pol Pot, or Stalin's Russia, or Nazi Germany, the Hunger Games is actually kind of a nice place to live. I mean, it's only 24 kids a year as opposed to millions of Jews being, executed in a genocidal sort of thing. So I think it's true within the genre, but again, it's children's lit.
Sure.
Teens lit, not really children's.
You want to weigh in? I want to reference two other series to say why I think Hunger Games is true, and I think that's one of the compelling things about it. One of the things I didn't care for about the Harry Potter series, among other things, was that I didn't think it realistically portrayed things like if you have students who are constantly breaking rules and going against their teachers and authority figures, it doesn't pan out well in real life, either in terms of immediate consequences or the type of character that is built. And I didn't feel like the series actually showed realistically, I mean, if I had a student at school, like Harry Potter acted at his school, I don't know, he'd be expelled. I mean, he's
Dumbledore's behind it.
There is no Dumbledore.
I'm not.
Yeah, it is. It's not time.
But an example like that, as I read it, I thought, are the kids reading and what are they absorbing? Are they understanding a real world cause and effect? If you do this kind of thing, this type of thing happens, either impacting people around you or your character within you. And I didn't think it was true in that sense. Take Twilight. If you actually have two people who are so enmeshed in each other like Bella and Edward are, that doesn't end well. It's creepy. That's stalker territory. It's not true. If some guy stood in your room at night and watched you sleep, you go to jail, not your boyfriend. So, I mean, it wasn't true. Hunger Games, I think, was true in the sense that what effect does horrific violence have on you? Let's say you are in a situation where, as kids, you're forced to kill kids. Well, can you brush that off or not? No, you can't. And as the story unfolds, the way you see the psychological, the emotional, the physical impact of the situations they're put in, How would this affect relationships? How would this affect you? I thought it was spot on. I thought the book was unflinching and looking at a cause and effect type of world. What would it be like to experience this? Can you walk away unscathed? No. I'll give you one other quick example if I can. There was a movie a couple years ago called Taken, which had this really compelling story of this girl's kidnapped by sex traffickers, and her dad's a guy with a special set of skills, which means he kills people easily. So he goes over to find her, and the whole movie is him tracking her down as he slowly picks off all the bad guys. There's a sense, which I was watching that as a dad going, man, says, what would I do for my kids if this happened? You know, this is kind of street justice, but nonetheless, okay, so at the end of the movie, Liam Neeson, who plays the dad, has just gone through, I don't know how many people, including torturing some of them to death. And the last scene in the movie, he's at his daughter's birthday party or something, and he's sitting there, and he's calm, and he's relaxed, and he's smiling as if he doesn't have a care in the world. And my first thought was, that's not true. You can't do those kind of things and be that kind of person. Even with the best of intent, it's going to change you. And it bugged me, and what otherwise was a really compelling movie, I thought it's a false ending. This is where I felt like The Hunger Games did not provide a false ending. In its context, in its world, it looked reality in the face.
Last one of the three here in this template I'm using. Noble. Is it noble? And what's meant by this is, after reading or watching, do I want to be a better person? I'm not asking, are the characters noble, or do they present an ideal that we should follow? That's a different discussion. On this, in this book, or in the book or the movie, after reading or watching, do I want to be, as a consumer, do I want to be a better person? And this works both directions. A good character can inspire me to emulate him. I want to be a better person after watching this. But, you know, Schindler's List, those kind of movies do that, can do that too. But a bad character can be equally motivating because you see how devastating somebody's behaviors are on what happens around them. You go, man, I don't want to be that. I want to be a better person. I don't want to wreak this kind of havoc on those around me. So both good and evil characters can make me want to be a better person. So did the characters in the Hunger Games accomplish that? If you think that did they address that issue, and did it make you want to be a better person?
I mean, Katniss repeatedly, for whatever reason, had to sacrifice. She sacrificed for her sister. She was constantly trying to keep Peeta safe and putting her life on the line for that. So in that aspect, you hope if ever came to that point, yes, I hope that I would man up or woman up or whatever and sacrifice and be able to put your life on the line. Like I said, that scene with Katniss and her sister makes me very emotional because I have my sister. I'm fine. Cool. And so, that was mean. Come on. So you hope that, yes, she had her reason. She had to do it, and you hope that in that situation you can do that. And, for me at least, you can put aside whatever feelings you have about it. She had to kill people. It's just the way it is to get home to take care of her sister. To take care of Peeta for whatever reason throughout the series. And for me, I would hope that in that extreme situation, that's how your hard parts would turn out.
Make you want a man up or woman up?
I'm going to answer two questions for the price of one. When Anthony was talking about True, I was thinking about, one of the things I really liked about Katniss was that she was very distrusting of anybody who did anything nice for her. And she was given bread when she was starving to death. She didn't trust that. Anytime anybody would give her something, she was always looking for the other shoe to drop. Why would somebody do this? And as somebody who's had some bad things go on in my past, I understand that. Always looking for, why is there something going on? Why would somebody do something nice out of the kindness of their heart when your experience shows you opposite? To the noble thing, my son is reading the book. He's 12, and he's reading the book because I gave it to him. And he's got that pre-teen, the whole thing is all about me, everybody should do stuff for me, I will play video games as long as I want, nobody can make me share. He's just got a very selfish attitude. And I thought the book did a nice job of showing people who were self-sacrificing. I think Katniss basically giving up her life for her sister was amazing. I thought, Peeta, when she's starving to death, gives her bread. And he does it by burning bread, so his mom beats him for it, punches him in the eye, and then gives her the bread. I thought that was an incredible thing. And all throughout the book, these people are going through these terrible things, are very self-sacrificing. And it was something that I wanted to get across to my son, that, hey, it's not all about you, it's all about me.
How's that working for you?
It's iffy.
Yeah, Dave said, I don't need to add anything to that.
Okay.
I think it was, well, I will though. It's such a dystopian world that there's a sense in which even some of the bad characters, especially among the kids in the Hunger Games, who are violent and doing everything they can to win the game, there's a sense in which you almost can't put them in the book's world. It's tough to put them in a category of bad because they have to win the Hunger Games. They're going to have to kill everybody at some point. So even some of the worst kids in the Hunger Games, who are real jerks, there's a sense in which in that particular group you kind of go, okay, whatever. But in the broader sense of what characterizes the Capitol and what characterizes people outside of it, yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody walks away from that going, man, I'd love to be a citizen of the Capitol. It just didn't portray it as a positive thing.
Wouldn't you say that some of those kids would be very similar to like Spartan kids, is going through their training? They are trained, because they're assuming that they're going to die at some point. And
Yeah. Some of the worst ones in the games have been trained to win the games. That's all they know.
Well,
Yeah.
right, that's all they know. Like at the end of the movie, Cato kind of starts to realize that he's been brainwashed. So, I mean, how much can you really blame them for what they have to do and being trained that way?
Yeah.
is there a redemptive end to it?
Is that in your list that you're coming to, or should
Kind
we
of.
do it now?
Oh, okay.
Well, so yes, maybe. Feel free to use this as a jumping off. I think it'll get that. I mean, well, let me go through this,
Yeah.
and then I think it will tie into that. I already described meta-narrative a little bit, the story behind a story. And by this, I don't mean, like my high school English teacher said, draw whatever you'd like to from the story and, make your own application. I don't mean some subjective thing that we're pulling from it. When I'm talking about a story behind a story, I'm suggesting that there's some inherent meaning that's already in the story because the story reflects reality. From our worldview specifically, if God exists, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that we ought to see his fingerprints all around us. And I don't just mean in the way of, in creation, things like that, although I do mean that. But I think there are other ways that we ought to see, if there really is a God, that we ought to see evidence of his existence. When I think of books, movies, and mythology and things like that, I see them as echoes that remain of a larger, older story. An ancient story we're just retelling. While it may not be the author's intent to point to God, I don't think they can't help but do so. I think there are a number of things, and I'm not talking just Hunger Games here, I'm talking in general. Authors tend to tell stories that resonate because they're true. In Hunger Games, as Emily's already mentioned, Katniss steps in to save her sister's life by sacrificing her own. Why? She assumed she was going to die. That was part of the beginning. So we've got a theme of sacrifice. Why is sacrifice a noble thing? Why does that resonate with us? Why is that moving? Tony Stark gets a new heart and a new beginning in Iron Man. Why is that a theme that we should look at? In Braveheart, William Wallace leads his countrymen to shake free from the opposition they were born into and fight for freedom. What's the big deal with freedom? In The Matrix, Neo is seen as the one who holds salvation. In Twilight, I'm trying. Edward Cullen embodies a savior figure to Bella. Whether it's healthy or not is another topic. But he's seen as a savior. Why do we want to be saved? Why do we value sacrifice? Why do we want a new start? Why our odds? Why do we want freedom from oppression? Is it possible that there is a reality that exists that these things all are just echoes of? So, these authors may not intend to point their audience to Christ, but I think that they can't help it. They're telling stories because they resonate with the human experience. They resonate because they're true. And my contention is that Christian worldview makes sense of them all, where others may not. I think they don't. So given this big picture of how Christians see the world, do you think that the Hunger Games has any touch points that we could use in order to start a worthwhile conversation that Christianity would speak to? So if we're talking about having apologetic conversations, if we're talking about, we've got this thing that's part of the conversation now, this story that's out there now. What are we going to do with it? It can be a wall that isolates us, or it can be a bridge that builds, is a connection. So that's theoretical. Do you see, and this is an open-ended one, you can jump off on Carrie's question here, do you see in Hunger Games, what themes, if any, do you see that reflect this meta-narrative reality that we Christians believe is true? Does that make sense? And there may be none, or there may be a bunch.
Okay, I'll start. I don't see it as a barrier series. I see it as a bridge series, very much so. But one of the key reasons is this. When I finished the trilogy, I really enjoyed the reading of the trilogy. I was very moved by a lot of things. It's not light reading. I mean, it's serious reading. But I got to the end, and I remember thinking, this is really good, but then thinking, but something's not complete. And I have to give spoilers here to talk about it. And it struck me that the way the whole story winds up, the rebels overthrow the Capitol, but not without great cost, including some of the heroes being interred and tortured and brainwashed. I mean, it's really brutal. When they take over the Capitol, one of their first decisions that they need to make is, how do we punish the Capitol for subjecting us to the Hunger Games? Because we've overthrown them to stop the Hunger Games. And what they decide to do is make the Capitol do a Hunger Games. So just like that, your rebels who've experienced the Hunger Games turn around and plan to make them pay in the same way. Now, Katniss undermines it. I won't give anything away, Carl. Katniss makes a decision that allows that not to happen, but it's yet again a real brutal decision. The story winds down with the rebels taking over the Capitol. But frankly, I think without a lot of hope that the rebels will ultimately be much different than the Capitol in the long term. Katniss finds her redemption by marrying a particular guy and kind of moving into their equivalent of an Amish community, I think, and isolating themselves from everything else and raising a couple kids. And in the last chapter, what you see is they found peace in the sense that they don't have to be involved with anything around them, and nothing's interacting with them. And it's clear that both of them are still very broken individuals from all the things they went through, and that was just going to be the rest of their life. So the ending, in some ways, the redemption that's offered is relationships with people. Part of the horror of the series is that people are simply treated as objects. Part of what's compelling about the end is that she finally finds someone who she trusts as opposed to at the beginning. She's found someone she can give herself to completely. They both see each other's flaws and weaknesses and everything and love each other anyway. In a world without God, I think that's one of the best things you can offer. I mean, it's an important thing. We all agree that human relationships are important. But then it struck me that the redemption that's offered, or the hope that's offered, is small r redemption, or small h hope. Because I don't see that the series is hinting that the world will be a better place. What I see hinted at is that Katniss and her husband and her kids have made a little oasis that's better, and if they can just keep that oasis intact, the rest of the world might just burn, but they might not have to be a part of it. Now, I see that as a bridge builder because I think, and sorry, I don't mean to really go off, but Scott said things resonate because they're true. I would broaden that a little bit. I think things resonate with people for three reasons that involve truth. One is that it's true. One is that they think it's true. And the third is that they wish it were true. So Twilight, I think, resonates with the particular teenage girls because they wish it were true. They wish they could find a guy who's bigger than life, who will protect them, who will respect their boundaries. Okay, there's all complicated. I don't like the Twilight series, but nonetheless, I think that's the image that's there. That
it's a lasting love. It's a love that will last
right,
1,000 years.
Right. A guy who will give his life for me, and a guy who can give me life. A guy who truly can complete me. I think they wish it were true. That's what resonates. The Hunger Games, I'm not going to say it resonates because it's true, because it's a world without God, so I don't think it's completely true. But I think what resonates is that this is what many, many people think is true. That the only hope I have in this world of really finding a place of connection and solidity, if I can find someone who knows me as I am and loves me anyway in spite of all my flaws. Now, that's not a bad message, honestly. If you can find that kind of love, it's not a bad love. But it stops short of saying, wow, where do you find that foundation? Is there an ultimate sort of this? Do you have to find another person to save you? Because that's a dangerous road to go down.
Why does that resonate with us
Yeah.
in an evolutionary worldview? We've got a question.
Well, yeah, that's a good way to
How
put
would you
it.
build that bridge? The reason I think it resonates with us is because the Trinity is the core of all reality, which is at the heart relation. And we reflect that as image bearers. That's why we have a hope in human relationships, and which I think is a shadow of the ultimate relationship.
Yeah, we can explain it. The other explanation would be evolution is just, it's a happy accident of evolution that we have this relational desire.
Yeah,
Well,
but
if that's the truth, it's not valuable.
No, and evolution is red in tooth and claw. I mean, it is at
It
the
is the
heart.
Hunger Games.
Yeah, at the
Yeah.
heart of it, it is,
Yeah.
you know, the survival of the fittest. It's not survival of the relationalist necessarily.
You know, the argument from desire, which we'll get to at some point, says that there are things that we desire because there is something that exists that can satisfy that desire. I have the desire for ice cream sometimes because such a thing as ice cream exists. So the extension of the argument from desire is to say that the reason that we long for, there are some things in life that we desire that which desires cannot be satisfied here. So the question is, if there are desires that we have that can't be satisfied here, maybe it's the case that there is another place that they can be satisfied. So things like ultimate peace, goodness, hope, eternality, love, in life with God forever, those kind of things can be satisfied. That's why it resonates with us to build this little, hope community. But why do we want that? Well, because there is this real hope, this real sense of hope that does exist, that we can aspire
I think
to.
the longing for utopia itself is probably.
Absolutely, yeah.
I know there's a couple of hands. I'm going to say something real quick, then I'm going to stop talking because I love talking. Let's assume my little template is true. Things resonate because they're either true or we think they're true or we wish they're true. So, granted that, here's what I think resonates, particularly with teenage girls, about something that's actually true about the world. I think, culturally speaking, young girls increasingly feel all alone. They're increasingly fatherless. They feel betrayed by people who love them. They're damaged. And Carl's even talking how part of it resonates with them. They're cynical. I think that's a harsh but true reality for more and more, particularly girls growing up in our society. I think that part resonates because it's unfortunately true. I think one question the book addresses is, can you survive all this? And Katniss does. So there's this kind of hope that, yes, you can survive, but you'll always be broken. At the end of the book, she survives, but she's very broken, and there's not a suggestion really that she's going to completely recover. I think it's what they think is true, that I probably can survive, but I'm never going to be healthy. And that's where I think the bridge building comes in. You go, you know what? I agree with the first. I understand why you need the second, but there's something else to offer. I think what you wish were true actually is true, and that is, there's another step beyond this. There is a way to find health and healing and hope. So I think you see those first couple as your first couple steps over the bridge, and it puts us in place to complete it.
Well, you two, push them out of the way. Any connection points?
I'm going to go in a little different direction than what I was thinking earlier. I think that it hits on a belief in us of revolution. There is something within human beings that says there is just something wrong with the world, and we want a revolution. And I think you see it in a lot of dystopian books. There's always this thing, V for Vendetta, all these things where you want to overturn the status quo because there's just something wrong with the status quo. And I think for most of us, I think we feel that way about the world as it is. There is just something wrong. And the Hunger Games holds out revolution, which much literature does. But I think the Hunger Games also points out another truth, and that is revolution never takes you to where you want to go. I was sharing this with Anthony, that if you look at what Gandhi did in India, he used nonviolent means to push the British out, which was a good thing because the British were oppressive. But then Pakistan and India broke into civil war, and the death toll is between, depending on which website you look at, hundreds of thousands into the millions. They fought 4 wars, And it's one of those places where we're afraid of nuclear war breaking out because they both have nuclear weapons. You got the Muslims and the Hindus, and they hate each other, and they can fire it off at any time. The revolution actually turned out to be worse than the original issue. And I think the revolution that we really want, or that we really need anyways, if we don't know we want it, doesn't come from overturning, occupying Wall Street probably isn't going to solve your problem, because you're probably just as bad as whoever you pushed out. It has to come from an outside source, because humans over and over again screw things up.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of hands in there, Alex, if you have time for it.
Yeah, if you got questions for them on the topic, yeah.
So my question kind of falls along the lines of, what do you do with this? It's a given that it's a hot book. It's a given that, you know, teens and even preteens are scooping this thing up. They're seeing the movies, they're reading the books. You know, assuming that we want to give them wise guidance or to help them help ourselves unpack what we're reading there. How do you handle that? What do you do when faced with, I'm just not going to read that. I know it's about kids killing kids and that's it. Or I've read all three of them. I've got the movies. I'm buying the posters, and now I'm reading all three of them again and again and again and again.
He's talking to you, Alan.
Well, my question is kind of how do you unpack the things that you see? And as I've read through the Hunger Games and listened to you guys, I hear this theme of a bridge coming up. So what does that bridge look like? I mean, is it recognizing, and one of the things I loved about the books was that it was so pristinely godless. I mean, in the movie they use, you know, expletive a couple of times, but in the book there's none of that. And what I liked about it was there were no confusing messages that without God this is what you get. And even in that, you know, Scripture says that eternity is written on our hearts. And there were things that came up like the nobility of self-sacrifice, of putting someone else's needs above you, of Rue's partner preserving Katniss's life in honor of her act. I mean, recognizing that there are these...
Paying off the debt.
Yeah, and a debt that he didn't really owe, and one that could have really come back to haunt him badly. And I mean, these are the kinds of things that the truisms that were in there. How do you unpack that? And is it worth reading? Is it worth wading through the death and the abysmal treatment and is it worth wading through all that to get to the truths that are embedded in it to bring out the hope that's there, and how maybe even though it's misguided, it's something that God has written in our hearts.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I guess I would look at your sphere of influence. Who do you know? If nobody you know is reading the book and you don't feel like reading the book, then don't. I mean, I don't think there's any spiritual imperative to go do that. But if you're around a lot of people who are reading, and particularly non-believers, it could be a potential bridge. Let me use something as an example that's not the Hunger Games. It's shocking to nobody, I'm a huge comic book fan. And a lot of people I know growing up who are atheists or agnostics are comic book fans. And we've talked over on Facebook and different things about Superman, because Superman is a very Christ-like figure. He is specifically a Christ-like figure. He's sent from a dying planet. He's the guy's only begotten son, sent here to save us from our issues. So I've been able to use that as a bridge to people who will not discuss anything biblical. You're not going to be able to tell them John 3:16 because that's it. We'll never talk to you again. But we can use Superman, in some cases Peter Parker, as that bridge. So that's how it works for me. And I've not had to use Hunger Games that way, but I like to think I have fun.
And let me turn the question maybe around. Not as a Christian trying to talk with an agnostic or an atheist about opening a door to a larger narrative, but rather you as a Christian talking to other Christian brothers and sisters who are now trying to decide, should I even read the thing? Should I toss it out on its ear? Is this going to be is this Twilight all over again? Is this Harry Potter? Is this, I mean, pick your other series that was rejected on other, premises.
I have a couple of thoughts. One would be, well, kind of to play off what Carl said, it depends on what's going on in your life. If you've got a kid that's into that, that wants to read the book, then Christian or not, that gives you an in to have discussions. I plug a book by a great coach called Tactics. It talks about how to have discussions with people. His main purpose is to have discussions, lead to evangelism. But it's not just that. The whole point is to shift the conversation. You stay in control by asking questions that draw out the other person. So I would think from a tactical point of view, to have a discussion with someone, to do things like, you really like this book? Why? And then just sit and listen. Because you don't have to do any homework. Even if you haven't read the book, you can ask what they liked about it. And they said, well, I really love what Katniss did. She really gave of herself. How so? You can say very little and let them just rattle on. You're getting an idea of what resonates with them, what's important to them. Because for one person it's going to be one thing, and another might be something different. So that will give you an idea of what they're finding in the book that they enjoy. And then that could be a jumping off point with some of the things that have been discussed already. So you like the idea of her sacrificing. That was pretty impressive and very moving. Why? Why do you think it's moving that she lays her life down for her sister? There's this other story I can think of that happens to have a similar thing, where somebody lays down their life for a friend kind of deal, and I get that. So I think using that tactical approach can be very helpful because it's not a burden. It's very easy to do because you're asking very sharp, short, pointed questions. The other thing is Suzanne Collins, is that her thing? She actually wrote a book, discussion guide. It's full of questions, and it was, last I checked, it was free for Kindle. I got it, I haven't looked at it, but it walks you through at least one book, and it might be the whole series, I'm not sure, walks you through. So you could do a book study. It could be you and your kid doing it. It could be just something to read through and look at, as kind of an example of how you can have these kind of conversations on other books.
My understanding is that the early Christian church, actually a lot of their education program involved Greek and Roman mythology. And they knew their kids were going to be exposed to it in the arenas that they were in. And so they just took it in and they taught it. And what they took an approach similar to what Lewis said with mythology. And Lewis came to Christ largely because Tolkien talked with him about how all mythological stories are pointing to this greater meta-narrative. And that Tolkien's explanation was it's God revealing himself through all these other stories because there's a myth with a capital M that's true. The rest of these belong to be true. It turns out they are true. So Lewis and Tolkien were both big fans of all kinds of mythology and fantastical things like that because they believed it's a real cool way to identify universal human longings and then point them to the solution. My understanding is that the early Christian church did that with Greek and Roman mythology. They used it as part of their education to their kids, and they would go through a story of, who's the dude, Sisyphus, who pushes the rock up the hill, is that right? Okay, what's the Christian application? It's a universal theme. Where do we see the Bible talking about? They would go through all these different things. You hear Paul or Mars Hill obviously quoting Greek and Roman poets. And thinking of that particular culture, the Greeks and Romans at that time, I think decadent would be a kind word to describe most of what they stood for. But there was a way in which the church embraced these other things going on and redeemed it. Mark Driscoll uses a template. It's when you look at cultural things, you reject it, as in you simply can't make something good out of it. Pornography. We're not going to redeem that one. We want to redeem the people. You understand? You're not going to show a porn movie and try to pull some good message out of it. Or do you redeem it? Is it something that's problematic? There's issues that's raised, but there's a way to take it and use a discussion that points toward the big story, that points toward Christ, and points toward hope. Or is it something you receive, like this is awesome, and you just recommend it to everybody? Somewhere on that scale, I think you clearly aren't doing what's over here, but there's a lot of things that are redeemable in particular situations, but not in every situation. And then there's some things that get real close to VeggieTales, for crying out loud. Lord of the Beans. You know what? I'll recommend anybody watch that because it's hilarious and it's got these cool things for kids. So I would put Hunger Games in clearly redeemable category. I'm not sure I'd say recommend it to everybody. In fact, I wouldn't say recommend it to everybody. But I think this the importance of knowing the people around you, knowing your own kids, getting to know your kids' friends, knowing whoever's in your life. Who do you recommend this to? I have TV shows that I watch that I wouldn't recommend to everybody. But there's some people I recommend it to because I know the topics in there are topics that will resonate with them, and then I can use as a springboard to discuss something else, but I'm not recommending to everybody. So I think some of these cultural things, I don't have a template for you, Tony. I think as a parent, you have to make a decision. Is this something I can redeem with my kids? You know, AJ will come home from watching a movie with her friends, and I'll go, how was it? I'll go, that's good. That isn't a good enough answer. What was good about it? I was entertained. What was entertaining about it? Hunger Games, when he was done, we talked about the themes. He read that. When he reads, and I give you a lot of examples, but I want my son to articulate what were the main themes in it. What do you think the author wanted you to learn from that? So I'm trying to teach him to think. I figured that's a tool that will help him the rest of his life, no matter what he comes in contact with. If I can teach him to think, I think that goes a long ways toward building wisdom in kids.
Yeah, Amber, and then Beth, and then I'll wrap up.
I just have a quick question. I live in a world where these books don't exist. I'm not interested in books. I don't read books like this. I read, let's be clear. But I don't read like Harry Potter and Hunger Games and stuff. And, I mean, I would be willing to, but you know, I have Blake. He's 9. He's a very mature 9. You know, Anthony and Carl know him. And he came home one day and was like, "Oh, Mommy, I want to read this book, blah, blah, blah," because all the kids at school are doing it. And so I asked my friend who I go to church with, and she allowed her young children to read it. What do you think, without me having to read it first, because I have a feeling in my brain that I would never get through it, because I'm just not interested in it. But what do you think is a good age limit for a book like this? Is that so hard of a question to answer?
Yeah.
Depends on the kid.
Yeah.
Okay, for me, my thing is I watch out for language. I'm not a big language person because for me, for a long time, I would have to sit there and think through things. When I first started coming to church, I actually had to think through what I was going to say before I'd say it. I think people thought I was dumb or something because I'd sit there, okay, no F word. Okay, here we go. Right. And it was really bad around my wife's family because that's a very social situation. It's not like an hour on a Sunday morning. So I'm very careful with language with my son. And I'm very, very, very careful about sexual situations.
Right.
And neither one of those things show up in the Hunger Games. Violence to me is not that big of a deal. Okay, I don't think that my son is going to go run around knocking down people with a bow. I can't see that happening. Plus, he's like this tall. He's not getting much pool anyways, you know? So for me, for a 12-year-old, I have no issue with it.
I think it just depends on your kid, but I'm very, very, like, extremely sensitive to violence. So this book obviously is not tailor-made for me. And it's not that I see kids, you don't see your kids going to do that. It's more when I read this kind of stuff when I was a kid, it would give me nightmares, like paralyzing, wake up in the middle of the night nightmares. So saying that, this is a violent book, but it was very redeemable, and for me, being that sensitive, it didn't cause an issue. But
Violence in the sense of like explicit detail, or?
No.
No, but it is kids killing each other. So I think if you're thinking about it that way, it's pretty violent. And if you see the movie, there's scenes that really get you. I mean, at least got me. But coming from a person who's very sensitive to that topic, it was okay for me as a 24-year-old woman. I was so,
No nightmares.
no, good.
Amber, one thing I look for is what my kid watching and reading repeatable in the real world in their life. So like sexual situations, yep, pretty easily repeatable. So I agree with Carl. I don't want my kids exposed to that till the proper time. Language, the same thing. It just gets embedded in your brain. Things like violence in the Hunger Games, they're not going to be in the Hunger Games. I mean, there's a broader discussion ahead about violence, but you're right. They're not going to be in an arena where other kids are trying to kill them and they're going to have to kill them back. Take an issue like magic in Lord of the Rings. The magic in Lord of the Rings is not repeatable. It's fantasy magic. There's no incantations. There's no real-world incantations that are said. There are no. Okay, so I don't care if my kids watch Lord of the Rings and watch Gandalf do magic. We talk about Gandalf's an angel in Tolkien's world, but they can't repeat it. There's no hints given in the book or the movie about something they could research. That was one of my cautions about a series like Harry Potter, was that it got pretty close to some real world things, and if kids wanted to, they could go online and Google things or research some things that would lead them to something in the real world that would lead them in a spiritual direction that I found troublesome. So that's one thing I look for is can they make an easy real world connection that could lead them down a bad path? If so, that's a big red flag.
Something else that I'd recommend, at the end of each section, specifically in the Hunger Games one, I've got 5 or 6 posts by bloggers that most of our friends of mine that are all over that have read the series and have gone through, you know, what their thoughts are, pros and cons, and connection points that you're talking about too. So if you're really looking into what's the vibe of it and you know what's it, who is the appropriate reader, it might be good to look at some of those and see what their thoughts are.
Yeah, and my point is directly tied to this topic, but I work for the writer series in Traverse City, and so we bring in authors and talk about books a lot. We do a lot with students. And so we actually tried to get Suzanne Collins, but the movie came out and it's just way too big. But one of the things that we look at, I'm a big fan, I'm pretty anti-censorship, I'm a big fan of kids being able to read things and not hiding things from them as long as they're relatively age appropriate. I think one of the things that I read that really stuck with me, there was a story about how YA books are becoming so dark. And one of the things that a librarian who was interviewed about it said, you would be surprised how many of these kids are experiencing living darker things than what they're reading in the books every day with bullying and things that are going on in school. So, I certainly think it helps to have adult supervision and adult conversations about them. But there are a lot of issues, and I know this is a Christian apologetics conversation, so you're going to want to look at the Christian themes or morals in the book. But I think you would be surprised just on the surface level talking about violence as entertainment or reality shows as entertainment or corruption in government. I mean, there are a lot of themes that are good discussion points for teens that they're dealing with right now and the things that they're seeing in entertainment and the politics, being a political year. So you can go the extra step then and talk about where does God fit in this discussion in Christianity, but I think if you're talking to kids who are secular teens or aren't exposed to Christianity, there are still a lot of issues to engage them on that are really serious moral questions that I think it's really healthy that someone is writing to them in an entertaining way that they're thinking about these things.
Here's an example. Let's say someone wrote a book about a crazy guy who brings around him an army of children that he brainwashes to murder for him. What am I talking about? Coney. It's a real world thing, and the kids know about it. So you novelize it, if you put it in fiction, does that put red flags up? I don't want my kids to read this story, and yet it's a real world story that's happening far away. And if an author can capture their imagination in a way that truly makes them care, in a way that a distant objective news source doesn't, well, now you got a tough question. Is this a good thing? I mean, it could be dark, but is it real? I mean, I don't think it's I don't think there's a line that's always easily drawn in some of the things. Parts of the Old Testament I don't want my kids to read. It's in the Bible. Does that make it off limits for them? Well, there's a context. There's questions and ways to work with your kids on that. Otherwise, I can't read a story about 10 pages through a head. But it's there. God saw fit to put it as part of his revelation.
Just a speculative question. Does anyone think there's intentionality in the authors that gains your higher marks? I mean, or was it? Well, Scott described that a lot of these have redeeming value, intended or unintended. So this one got some pretty high marks. Do you think there's anything intended on the author?
Suzanne Collins to know whether.
I tried to find stuff on her and I could not find anything.
I thought I read today that she's
I'm not sure. I don't know anything about that.
Curious.
All right, we better wrap up. We started a little late. It's a little late now.